let's talk about Netroots. You were there. You've been going since 2007. I think I was was the first one 2005 when it was daily yearly coast.
Was the first one.
Yeah, I spent a lot of years there. It is changed over the years, and you write about some of those changes. Give us a sense of what's happening there, because Emma and Matt were at the DSA convention. I don't know why this one weekend in August has to be like where anybody left of the DNC is having their convention. But give me your sense of what was there, and I don't know, put it contrary to 07. I think we were both there in 07. I can't remember if that one was still in Vegas or not, but what have you noticed that's happening there?
Yeah, I started to talk a little bit about it, where there's this debate about how you ever get power back. And Netroots has changed over time. It started as progressive bloggers just being online, organizing politically, donating to their candidates, wanting the Democratic Party to get better, and meeting in one place to do that. So the big story out of the first, it was yearly coast for 2 years, and it was Netroots. Big story of the first was Ned Lamont's there, and they say we're going to beat Joe Lieberman, and then in a primary they beat Joe Lieberman. And it changed over time. The progressive donor space changed a lot, and changes all the time. But Labor wanted to fund it more. Progressive organizations wanted to fund it more. Somebody would have a $10 million grant, and they'd come and they'd fund a party at Netroots. It definitely had shrunk this year, which I took as, I was just taking notes of the funders from last year and this year. Certainly the progressive donor space, and this has been reported mostly in the New York Times, is just a little wimpy and not sure what to do. And they've been scaling back some of their funding for organizations. So that's one thing that came up. I quote from one panel in my story where people at nonprofits were saying, yeah, there's donors who stopped funding us because we put out a statement on Palestine. They said, we don't want that.
Wow.
It's not that secret. There's a good New York Magazine profile of Alex Soros where he says this about Sunrise Movement. It's like, yeah, we funded Sunrise Movement. Now they talk about Palestine. What's that about? So activists are dealing with how donors who might have just cut checks before don't want to anymore. And then people who are in Democratic politics, it's all the stuff we were talking about, but also a discussion of what do you do if you're just not allowed to win? What is the strategy for winning? And some of it was Democrats suck and they didn't have good messaging that breaches the race class divide. That's a common theme. That's 20 years of this in Netroots of look, if we had candidates who just explained to people how we could benefit them and how the right was screwing them and trying to divide them by race, instead of saying you get a tax break if you started a nonprofit in 3 years with a Pell Grant. Like, yeah, if we just were more compelling, we could win. So, you're Abdul al-Sayed's, your progressive members of Congress like Delia Ramirez, that's kind of that was the message they were saying. But nobody came out of it saying, hey, we figured it out. And that was, again, the big takeaway just from being there was it wasn't like a ghost town, but you could tell there are groups that used to send lots of people who have been minimized by Trump. And it's not just the donors. It is Media Matters and Act Blue have both been attacked by, in Media Matters' case, Elon Musk and Republican attorneys general in lawsuits meant to bankrupt them. In Act Blue, it's the DOJ trying to run Act Blue out of business because they are a funding portal for Democrats. The premise is that they're not stopping secret foreign money from getting in, which would be legal if they just had a stable coin, I guess. But it's a real problem if Act Blue does it. And so I was surprised. Now there was some media competing, there was competition, as you said, with a DSA convention, which is an overlapping story. Very little media there. And I think it's just, right now, the left is seen as just mostly like a problem for the Democratic Party. What do they do with it? This is how the Mamdani story is covered. But that's important. If the organizing capacity of the left is being strung in by donors and by investigations, look, that is a much worse and much more real version of what conservatives said was happening 10 years ago when the IRS was not giving tax status to every Tea Party group. This is happening under Republicans of trying to undermine progressive organizing. And one, it's been pretty successful. Two, some of the donors are fine with it. But that's a difference. I mean, this is story for like and a massive story that involves organizations that don't let anyone into their meetings, but the large donors saying we're not sure what we should be funding anymore because we think progressive activists are too crazy and too focused on Gaza. That is a real. There are some Democrats who think that is good because they do not want those activists to have much of a role in the party. They do not want them to be the face of the party. They want I mean, this is Hakeem Jeffries. They want that to go away so they can talk about Medicaid. And that was clearly happening. They were not at Netroots, but that was the worry about what was happening to the party at Netroots.
It's interesting. We have a clip. Let's play this clip. It was a panel that included Keith Ellison. I know you had an interview with Keith Ellison. And they featured a clip from
Derek Thompson.
Thompson. I guess he was
Abundance.
at the one of the Abundance corporate festivals and interviewing somebody, and this was sort of fascinating to me. Play this clip.
If you and I, Marshall, if we were having like a debate on this stage, if you and I were like running in a primary, and you said that, you said, the far right has a story and they've won. The far left has a story. The center doesn't have a story, and that's a problem. What I would say in response to that is, yeah, stories are for children. Americans need a plan.
What that guy said is wrong. If you're thinking about running for office, absolutely ignore him as aggressively as you can. But think about a story that is compelling, that anyone can understand, because you get why I'm very pissed off about Alex Smith, right? You get why I would leave Congress to fight for Alex Smith, right? Because the story happens to be a true story.
So this is a version of your part of the debate that you had with Ezra Klein, the co-author of Abundance, Sam, where you said that who is the villain of your story, and Ezra said that you had a difference of opinion about whether or not it was good politics to have a villain. You know, I've seen Donald Trump single-handedly change the debate about immigration in the Republican Party by having immigrants be the villain. Like when he rose to prominence, the RNC was like doing an autopsy about how they had lost to Obama with Romney, and they were talking about how they need to soften their stance and reach out to Latino voters. And Trump came in and completely took a sledgehammer to it just by the power of the narrative being repeated over and over and over again. And that guy, Mr. Centrist up there, wants to tell me that stories don't have power in politics. My God.
Yeah, I'm going to be boring and agree with everybody because obviously stories have power. It just, when you think about how one of the things that every Democrat is now nodding and agreeing with is, hey, we can't just respond to these crime stories in D.C. with charts of crime decreasing. Okay, that sounds like if you agree on that, you agree that, for example, Donald Trump changed a lot of opinions about immigration by saying, I'm going to stand on stage with some mothers of women whose children were killed by drunk drivers who weren't citizens and say, this will happen to you if we do not close the border. Yeah, obviously stories are important. I don't get the point of insulting people's intelligence on this. Do you want somebody to hear a story and then say, let me find the actual truth behind this? Sure. But you need compelling stories. This is how the media works, but it's also how I listen to, not just this podcast, but you listen to conservative podcasts, and they are not saying a new study came out. They're saying, check out this crazy video, check out this crazy person, check out this crazy person on TikTok.
Kids are using kitty litter in their classrooms, and I heard this from the amazing thing is that Thompson himself purports to tell a story in Abundance about mRNA. I mean, the story, it's not a very good story, personally, and I can understand now why, because he doesn't think that there's any value to it. But what's fascinating is, I think in that instance, I mean, I don't know what his motivation is about it, but that feels like what the Democrats are doing. I mean, like what the leadership of the Democratic Party is doing. We're not going to tell a story. we're going to just wait until Donald Trump's approval rating is in the toilet and let that do all the work for us. We don't need to provide a story because that would then require a vision of what America could be, right? Like, I mean, aside from how just absolutely stupid the idea of like there should be no narrative, like we plan to do what? Well, we don't need to tell you what the plan is. Putting that aside, it's almost as if that's how the Democratic establishment functions. Is like we don't have a vision of where we're going in any way, and so best to just like be at the ready and deploy certain things when it comes. I mean, it's almost like they don't want to be responsible for an overarching narrative. And it's, I don't know. I found that fascinating. Did you think like, with the Netroots thing, the most interesting thing, I mean, like my recollection has been the first year after a loss election tends to be a little bit like sort of disempowering for Netroots, and that it starts to come back when there's more sort of election activity in the second year. I mean, early on it was different because the energy was so untethered from like the Democratic machinations, I guess. There was more sort of like an independent life for the Netroots. But this idea of donors really sort of starving it, like, is there any type of broad understanding that the same people that they're defunding because they're talking about Gaza were also the people they were relying on to get the vote out, who were also upset about Gaza then? Like this, like it's a tacit admission that they were depressing the activists, if not with lack of dollars, but at least in terms of like what the campaign was saying about Gaza or not saying about Gaza.
Yeah, which I wrote about. The DNC is going to have its meeting end of the month, and the resolutions going around. One of them is a very soft Gaza one that just calls for a ceasefire. One that will probably not pass is calling for an arms embargo. The party is going to continue to fight about that, and it's an odd issue because if you look at the polling right now, just saying, hey, do you want your tax dollars to continue to be funding this war that you don't quite know why is not over yet? Most people say no. But not everything's around Gaza. It's more that, and this has happened throughout the liberal space. I hate that word, but the liberal spaces, basically, there has been this conflict between older and more, not even more conservative, just older liberals who fund organizations and younger progressives who've come into the organizations, where the younger progressives have different ideas about intersectionality, different ideas about Gaza, different ideas about even gender, and there has been a blame game. Very well covered in the New York Times, because the Times is one of the organs I think that enforces this, saying those guys wrecked it for us. Those guys are the ones who are wrecking the movement because they have ideas that are unpopular and they're alienating. The party was in better shape when when the people in the room were labor leaders who didn't care about this stuff. And even the labor leaders we have, this is Democrats talk themselves in my fantasy monologue, like Randy Weingarten is and her ideas appeal more to the people we have already, the liberals in Tacoma Park in Berkeley. We need those people who come from Northeast Ohio. How come we lost them? Well, part of the reason is because of these crazy progressives coming in. And you've seen this even in the fight over universities and them paying out settlements to the administration. You started to see some academics publish essays saying, look, can we just cut bait and like saw off the humanities people because they suck and I want my funding and I'm tired of them. And you have to give Trump his role in this. Trump is in his first term, because I don't think I know, he didn't win the popular vote. Democrats said this is an aberration. This is a more progressive and diverse country that did not want him to be president, and politics moved to the left with all the things people I'm just talking about moving in tandem. There was not this disagreement from the Democracy Alliance donors and the young progressives. That's why you saw like NARAL and Planned Parenthood, et cetera, saying, yes, we support defund the police. In the second Trump term, you now have these people, and what's the popular vote? 49.9% win. Because he won the popular vote, there is this sense that they have lost the country. This is several elections now of being unable to win places like Northeast Ohio. And those donors saying, we got to do something about these progressives because they're so alienating. And Republicans get that. In lieu of Democratic leadership that people know and respect and think are good, the Democratic leadership assigned by Republicans every week is like the craziest liberal they can find online. And that was the entire Sydney Sweeney discourse was just, there are some people on TikTok and some columnists for liberal websites who have this opinion. That's the Democratic Party. And after that, it was, there are sorority girls dancing. There might be some liberals who are against this. That's the Democratic Party. How do Democrats get this electoral coalition that's not identified with that? That's where Republicans think they've got progressives over the barrel, is you guys can't do that. We can build on the right a coalition of conservative Latino dads and white evangelicals and free press subscribers who hate liberalism. And you guys can't put a coalition together of conservative union members and Berkeley gender studies majors. You can't. So we're going to keep blowing it up. What's the response on the left? They have no idea what to do. They're progressively say the thing we do is build solidarity and remind people that it should not matter to you if a school has a gender policy you don't like somewhere else. Meanwhile, that your tax dollars are being redirected to Peter Thiel and your 401k is being put in private equity or in crypto. They're distracting you. That's a message that Democrats are happy making. But there is that view there that we need to do something so people don't think Democrat and then think some annoying college student. And that's basically, imagine a world where there is no conservative media. I don't think you get that. Conservatives had a version of, I wouldn't say this problem, but let's stimulate. Since Elon bought X, there's a lot of more very far right content on X that if you showed it to a swing voter, they might say, that's pretty gross. Like for the stuff we were talking about before of people fantasizing about how great it would be to deport Vivek Ramaswamy and give his house to Americans whose family fought in the Civil War. That's probably not that popular around the country. Why are they not forced to own that with swing voters? That's an interesting question that no one has figured out an answer to. And I've seen Chris Hayes ask this. How come J.D. Vance does not have to answer for some opinion he follows, and every Democrat has to answer for some random person on TikTok? It's not a rhetorical question. I think that is one part of it is the anti-woke backlash means just less interest in saying you won't believe what this Republican said. I mean, Trump exists. You'll believe what they said. You'll believe somebody said this on Twitter. But why is that political movement, which is not a majority movement, which if you went down to South Texas and showed it to a person who voted for Trump, hey, here's a guy who thinks you're not really human, they might not agree with that. But how come they're not supposed to? They don't own them too. I heard a little bit of that at Netroots, but there is a fatigue because people voted for Trump last time. He has run 3 times and gotten more votes each time. There's just this punch drunk attitude. Okay, maybe much of the country will put up with stuff that we think is anathema to democracy, is authoritarian, is racist. If they will, then what do we do? It's really
But
tough.
the answer's in their face, right? Like, I mean, this is what's frustrating about this conversation is an overarching vision about a working class coalition, and it's about improving people's standard of living by taxing the rich. That's the answer. That cuts across everything you're saying and gets ahead of the whatever aesthetic cultural elitism that they're trying to harness. And like, I'll give you credit, Dave, you were much more bullish on Trump winning or having a really good shot than I was, and I was wrong about Harris winning. So I defer to you on some of this stuff. Like, you know, that could cut across some of that squishiness that you're talking about.
Well,
at the same time, sorry, I've been interrupted, but also Trump, if he was running as Mitt Romney and saying, and I'll cut Social Security, I don't think any of this would work.
Right.
like you need him to do that too. But Sam, sorry, I interrupted you. Yeah.
No, but I'm curious about that question because I think part of the answer is the nominal left of center has less resources to do that now, I think, than it has probably at any time in the past 15 years, right? Like you mentioned, Media Matters is gone. They were a juggernaut. CAP is a shell of what it was. They basically jettisoned everybody from that organization, I don't know, 5 years ago, who
they just hired Anthony Blinken, so they're not going to embrace the pro-Palestine.
It's always
energy.
been. It's always been. It was developed as a sort of like a Clinton in exile, but they had a lot of progressives there. I mean, Faj was there, Sirota was there. I mean, people came out of that operation and were putting out content. And I remember 10, 15 years ago, if you would talk about a lawmaker in the Iowa legislature, a Republican who had some crazy idea, people would be like, what are you doing? That's ridiculous. Meanwhile, they could look at one person at a protest on the right and say, like, look at the Democrats. They're wearing stilts. And so this dynamic is sort of like built in, I think, to the nature on some level of the difference between the way society is set up, at least since probably the 60s, where hippie punching still echoes on some level. And we still have a Democratic Party that is defined by that attitude on some level where they feel a certain defensiveness. I think the Gaza stuff has sort of like has cleaved the Democratic leadership and establishment from much of the party, it seems to me. And that, I think, is another problem. But what do you think? I mean, aside from like the loss of resources, CAP, Media Matters, I think having a social media, having Twitter owned by Elon Musk at this point, particularly when we don't have blogs in the way that we do, we have this consolidation by Instagram and Facebook in a way that we didn't when it was Yearly Co's or Netroots Nation early on. Things were far more, small d democratic and populist just in terms of the media. I mean, we just don't have a similar dynamic to that. Maybe these shows like this somewhat replace it, but not exactly. What is your sense, if it doesn't include those things, as to why Democrats are in the defensive mode? Aside from the fact, I think Emma's point is, well taken. You need to have a positive agenda or an aggressive agenda or a proactive agenda. The best offense is a good defense, right? I mean, they attacked Kerry for being for what his strength was, but aside from that, taking these individual moments, and there's plenty of them, maybe there's too many, but in blowing them up. I mean, Epstein is the only thing that's happened like that, and that's not such a small thing. And it was only on the map because of the right.
It was. That's you identified something about the Epstein story, which was that in the current configuration of the parties, this is, I think, somebody called this the crank gap. It might have been Matt Iglesias, because he likes to coin terms. But there used to have a disaggregation of people who didn't trust the government. And frankly, just talking about media, I've been listening to not just a lot of podcasts, but a lot of old podcasts. And I'll listen to a podcast from 2009 or 10 or 14, and you'll find a guest on that who I checked their writing since then. And they in 2010, 14 were at Bush sucks. The Republicans are trying to destroy the country from within. The whole Department of Homeland Security is a mess, etc. You look at the writing in 2025, and they're like, Trump's amazing. He's blowing up the deep state. We need to find out what happened to Russiagate. There is a roving, not even that political, anti-establishment view that I think Democrats have not lost, like they weren't trying to hold on to it. Just as the parties changed, they became a more evidence-based, norms-loving party, and they didn't hold on to those people, and COVID sped that up. So that's part of it.
I'd
I
argue
think
that
there
was
this-
deliberate, Dave, right? In the
Yeah.
pursuing of suburban Republicans as a way to change the constituency of the party, which Chuck Schumer said since 2016 they were deliberately doing. That jettisoned critique of the government and as conspiracism, which I think really is alienating to folks who aren't well off or older boomers and have a difficult relationship with the government when you can't talk about dark things like Epstein. I mean, Democrats feel very uncomfortable using that kind of conspiracism against Trump. Sorry to cut you off.
No. Let's have some back and forth. That's fine. I think but it was interesting because it was so unnatural to them. Whereas something that's totally forgotten politically these days is 2006. The Bush administration is making a deal over ports management with a company from Dubai, and Chuck Schumer leads the charge in saying that's terrible. We can't have this Arab country running our ports. And just Democrats wouldn't do that anymore. They wouldn't say we're all in on a conspiracy theory that the color of skin and like the funding of these guys is a national security threat. Yeah, they just don't do that anymore. They have become a more let's defend America with facts and reason party, which I'm not saying even is bad, but the discourse, the conversation that sometimes is who would Bill Hicks be voting for now? That's what I mean. Is I just feel there's sort of a I don't trust these frauds in power mindset that is now entirely Republican, and there's a lot of organically popular media that has that mindset. That's the Joe Rogan thing. You've seen some Democrats go on Joe Rogan, and he doesn't really push them on that stuff when they've been successful. Your John Fettermans and your James Talarico's, and Republicans are successful. That's why they got bit, is because Kash Patel will go on Joe Rogan's show and say he's got all this information that he won't release it. That's been losing those people. But I'm thinking the audience of those people, the people who were floating between the parties before and always hated George W. Bush. I wrote about them in 2016. I was finding these people who'd voted for Ron Paul that were voting for Bernie Sanders. I've always been interested in that kind of voter. That consumer is very important. And that this is one fractal of what we're talking about, but that media Democrats are not seen as credible because they were the party that in 2020 was saying stay at home to avoid the spread. And I think that hangover is going to last for people for a while. How come Trump gets away with it? I have no idea. That's a complicated question. How he's made people forget he was president during all that. He's just overcorrected by destroying vaccine research, I guess. So what do Democrats do in this media? It's I feel like part of it is funding. So it's not like and Charlie Kirk's media network, the TP Turning Point network, it's very successful, but it involved lots of startup capital over many years.
Tons. Same with Daily Wire.
Being taken very seriously. Oh yeah, Daily Wire, same thing. Which has made a ton of mistakes and lost its CEO over them over-investing in a bunch of media products that didn't work. But it didn't go it didn't get shut down. like Think Progress got shut down. And so one thing I'm glad this ties what I was saying before because I was worried I was getting too rambling. Yeah, progressive donors, I think, need to be ready for some stuff to bloom that they don't like, because on the right, that happens. There are conversations that happen on right-wing media funded very well by large conservative donors that are not helpful for Republicans that day, and it doesn't matter because people stay organically interested in it. And sometimes they're talking about that stuff, and it catches fire, and Republicans do it. This is the entire politics of the gender issue. This was something that was lighting up conservative talk radio podcasts for years, and Republicans were saying, we lost all these elections over the bathroom bill in 2016. Shut up. This is not a winning issue. As soon as Trump wins the election, every Republican ad this year, not every ad, but every Republican campaign I've seen this year that has money is spending on gender stuff. So they are willing to have media figure something out and then chase after it because the media proved that it was popular. I don't think liberals are in that same space. They don't like seeing liberal commentators say the Democratic Party sucks. Yep. And it's like, you have to get over it. Like, there's just, it helps like Mike Johnson and Mitch McConnell, who are not popular. Well, Johnson more so, but Mitch McConnell's like gotten everything he ever wanted, and he never was popular on conservative media. It just helped the conservative media was popular, so they kept winning elections.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. Dave Weigel, author, journalist, Semaphore, newsletter. We will link to that newsletter at Semaphore. Dave, always a pleasure. Really appreciate it.
Oh, it was great. Thanks for this conversation. I really had fun.
Thanks.
Thanks, Dave.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.